This is really would be a good one too for your MLMs. Live, laugh, love.
Live, laugh, love. I got out of that LuLaRoe. Those leggings were just terrible. But now, if you need any Scentsy products, I've got some wax melts and some burners in my car. I'm going to say something, and it may be hard to hear, but you need to listen. The Munsters sucked. And we're going to talk about why. Hello, Champagne Nightmares. Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you'll stick around. My name is Janessa, and I am North Dakota's trash queen of glam, geek, and gore. And for this video, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about why the Munsters sucked. I was trying to stay positive. I was trying to stay hopeful. After they released that trailer, I was like, oh, this looks bad. But you know what? A lot can happen from trailer to final movie. I was like, you know what? There's still time for some color correction. There's time for an edit to come together. I don't really know from just this trailer, but it really was as bad as we all thought. And we're going to talk about why. So if you're excited to get in, burn some trash, and have a little bit of rant about how, despite all his good intentions, Rob Zombie completely shat all over the Munsters, then stick around because we're getting into it right now. If nothing else, this movie will make you believe in love again. I mean, if Rob Zombie can keep putting Sherry Moon Zombie in these movies despite how terrible of an actress she is, that's love. Find yourself someone who loves you the way that Rob Zombie loves Sherry Moon Zombie. So let's talk about the Munsters. Let's talk about why this movie sucked. And I know some people love it, and some people are really kind of divorced from the source material, or they just think it's campy and fun, or they didn't have a lot of expectations, whatever it is. I was never like a huge fan of the Munsters, but I watched it as a kid. I liked it. I really liked the movies that were in color, and so I was really disappointed. I found it really hard to watch. And the first thing that I think really went against it, and this I will say, is not Rob Zombie's fault, and that's that the movie was in color. So obviously the original Munsters was in black and white. It was a 60s TV show. It was in black and white, and that's how people think about the Munsters. And there are some of those people, the internet is full of people who have to be like, well, actually.
People, men.
And they will say, well, actually, the Munsters movies were in color. And that's true. I remember the Munsters movies being in color, and I loved them. I thought it was fun seeing Lily and Herman and Grandpa and the whole crew in full color. I thought that was fun. I don't necessarily think that color would be a bad idea, but I think that a lot of people had that nostalgia and wanted to see them in black and white, even if it was just part of the movie, even if there were sequences that were in black and white, and maybe there would be something that would trigger it, like Dorothy going over the rainbow, that would trigger it to being in full color. Now, this isn't Rob Zombie's fault, because he said in an interview that he wanted to shoot the movie in black and white, but the studio said no. So that's not entirely his fault. What is his fault is the way that they did the color. So for those who have seen the Munsters movies, the old ones, you know that they were in color, but they were that kind of faded 80s kind of color. It had almost like a vintage comic book feel. And the way that Rob Zombie did the colors was like Joel Schumacher's Batman on crack. So if you remember Joel Schumacher's Batman movies, he did Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. And a lot of people really roundly criticize them. I think that they're not great, but I think there's some redeeming qualities. And I think that he was trying to get a really saturated comic book feel to those movies, but it was just a little bit heavy-handed. So especially Batman and Robin, anytime the scene had anything to do with Poison Ivy, the lighting was like green. It was just like super saturated green. Anytime it was Batman, dark blue. Anytime it was Robin, it was red. Anytime it was Mr. Freeze, it was a pale blue. Anytime it was Batgirl, it was like a pink purple. And it was really heavy-handed and like really obvious and saturated. This movie makes that look subtle. The way that Joel Schumacher did his colors, like compared to the Munsters, who thought that it could get worse? And he did say, Rob Zombie did say in an interview that since he couldn't shoot in black and white, that's what he wanted. He wanted this really saturated, like kind of trippy sort of look to it. And I don't necessarily think that it's all bad, but I think that this movie is based on an old property. I think that you're pulling people in through nostalgia. And so it needs to have something that kind of ties back to that nostalgia. And I think the color was just too much. There's a way to do saturated and colorful that doesn't have to be full-on acid trip. And I just think he missed the mark. The second thing that really doomed the Munsters was the acting. I mean, Herman was okay, and I thought Grandpa was okay. They were a little bit too much. Now, I've come to terms with the fact that Sheri Moon Zombie is just a terrible actress. I'm sorry, I said it and I meant it. We're going to be controversial yet brave on this channel. Sheri Moon Zombie is a terrible actress. God bless Rob Zombie for giving her work to do, because she's just wooden and kind of terrible. And that's something that you can get away with a little bit easier in horror. In his like House of 1,000 Corpses style of movie, you can get away with being kind of a bad actor. Because we kind of expect that. Horror has this like fun but trashy, lowbrow kind of feel. It's this spirit. It's the indie spirit. Even when it's a big budget production or whatever, it still has that like independent spirit, and you don't expect it to be top-notch talent. Nobody's getting an Oscar for House of 1,000 Corpses, so we don't expect that. But in a comedy like this, she was so wooden and just not sure how to behave, and she kept doing these weird things with her hands, and like, there was all of this movement. I don't know what that was about. It just was weird and awful. And then the werewolf character, the brother, he was kind of this weird sort of like stereotypical pimp character. And he was kind of the only character that read as being like potentially, I mean, they're werewolves and zombies and shit like that. I get it. But he was the only character that was sort of coded as being like representative of a person of color. And then he was like this weird pimp character. It was not a good look. It was not great. The werewolf character was too much. Sheri Moon Zombie, I mean, couldn't act her way out of a brown paper bag if it was soaking wet. It was just, like, the acting was not great. Herman was probably the best. Grandpa did an okay job. But it was just really kind of cheesy and over the top. I love trash movies. I love movies with bad acting and all this kind of stuff, and horror movies and all that kind of stuff. I love it. But I like it to be part of the spirit, where you can tell that people just love the source material. And you didn't get that sense of joy from this movie. And also, they totally wasted the cameo of Cassandra Peterson. So Cassandra Peterson is Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, and she appears in the Munsters. She's a real estate agent who gets them their house in California, and she tells them on the phone. So before, they only show part of her face, and she's talking on the phone, and she's like, "Now, when you come here, I'm going to a party, so don't be surprised by my appearance." This was a perfect opportunity for them to show up and for her to greet them as Elvira, because that line mimics a line that she does in Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, where somebody says, "Your appearance was a bit of a shock to me." And she's like, "My appearance is kind of a shock to everybody." And so when she says, "Don't be shocked by my appearance," I was like, this is perfect, because she's going to a Halloween party. And so to be Elvira, she could have been like, "Oh, I'm this real estate agent who's dressed up as Elvira." It could have been this really fun, like, meta moment and really played with that. No, she's in this, like, witch outfit and only has her face painted green with, like, her plain skin for her neck and her hands. And it looks like a small town person just doing a cheesy Halloween costume or whatever. But then somehow they look at that and believe she's a monster, like a real monster, like they are. And I was like, what? It was just such a waste. Why not have her be there as Elvira, especially when you have that perfect setup? What are you doing, Rob? What are you doing? Number 3, and probably the biggest reason, is the writing. Seriously, what the fuck? The writing of this movie makes no goddamn sense. So the first thing that they did that really kind of dooms the movie project is that they made it a prequel. So I get that it's like tracing the love story. You get introduced to Herman and Lily and see how they fell in love and blah, 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 blah. Which maybe if you had a stronger lead actress could have worked in some universe. Not with Sherry Moon Zombie. But when you're doing this classic TV show and you're missing 40% of the main cast, that's a problem. Because doing it as a prequel, obviously we have no Eddie and no cousin Marilyn. And so it really sort of misses the mark of these characters. We don't get to see them in the typical sort of situations. And so it just seems like people in questionable Munsters cosplay acting out this story. It doesn't really have any connection to the source material because there's nothing about it. It's not set in California like the original show was. This is when they're still in Transylvania. It's a story that people are not familiar with, and 2 of the key cast members are not included. So it just didn't really make sense, and it made it hard for that to gel. And they brought in these other, like, side characters. Romani woman that the werewolf brother owes money to. And then the story that they did have makes no sense. So the, like, pimp werewolf owes money to this Romani woman. She's trying to get Grandpa's castle because they had been lovers and he rejected her or something. So then the master plan, and I will admit, this movie was kind of bad, and I was on the couch, and I may have dozed off a little bit during this part. Maybe I missed a key point, but I certainly wasn't going to watch it again to try to research. And so, basically, the werewolf, like, tricks Herman into signing over Grandpa's castle to the Romani woman, the fortune teller. The argument, the way he was setting it up, is like, well, if you 2 are married, then you share ownership of these possessions. And so even though it's Grandpa's castle, not even Lily's castle, when Herman marries Lily, then he can just sign over the rights to the castle on day 1? What? I mean, I don't have any sort of, like, legal training, but I feel like that's not legitimate. And maybe, like, monster law is different. What the fuck are you doing? This story is so stupid. And so then the Romani woman ends up with the castle, and they have to move to Los Angeles. And that's where it's then getting them set up in this new house that's going to become the setting that would be the Munsters TV show. So that's where it kind of leads up to the present. And then the way that they behave around other people is super inconsistent. So they're in Transylvania, where it's all monsters and creepy people, and they fit in, right? Well, it shows Herman and Lily going to Paris on their honeymoon, and they're not bothered by the fact that it's all normal people. They're just like, oh, France is really filled with ugly people. Like, oh, I feel bad for the French. They're such ugly people. Blah, blah, blah. It's this whole thing. Which kind of gets to the original Munsters feeling. We're going to talk about that in a second. But they're just like, oh, they're so ugly and blah, blah, blah. Well, then later on, when they're in California, they go to a Halloween party to meet all the neighbors at this house that they bought. And everybody's dressed up like monsters, so they're like, oh, we're living in this neighborhood with all these monsters. And then the next day, they come out of the front door in the morning, and of course, Halloween is over, so nobody's all dressed up. And they just freak out. It's like they're terrified of, they're like, whoa, these freaky people, ah. That was never part of the Munsters. The Munsters were never scared of normal people. They just felt that they were, like, ugly or kind of odd, but they were never frightened of them. And that's what we're going to get to in the next point. What made the Munsters TV show so good was the fact that it was a show about outsiders who didn't know that they were outsiders. They were oblivious to it. And so when people would see them and react to their monstrousness, they were like, oh, that's strange. Like if somebody would sort of see them and run off, they'd be like, oh, they must have realized they left their stove on. And, you know, things like that. They were never scared of other people. They were never, like, worried about them. It was never a thing. They just thought, oh, well, they're not as attractive as us, but we shouldn't lord that over them. It was always this kind of very sort of polite, like, oh, these poor people or whatever. And that's where Marilyn comes in, because Cousin Marilyn is the one who looks normal. We have to be nice to Cousin Marilyn. We have to take care of her because she's kind of plain. You know, that's like 60s code for she's the homely one in the family. Like, oh, she's ugly. And of course, the twist on that is that she was very lovely, you know, blonde, very much the picture of like what a pretty girl in the 60s looked like. But then they're like, oh, poor Marilyn. Like, it's not her fault that she was born this plain and all this kind of stuff. That was the thing, is that they were never upset about other people. They were never worried about them. They were just kind of leading their joyful, monstrous lives. They were outsiders who didn't know that they were outsiders. They thought that they were kind of the norm. And they were just around other people who were maybe a little bit different from them. A little bit not as cool, not as attractive, whatever. They're just like, but we go along to get along. You know, it was happy, it was joyful. There was something about this that just felt really pained in the storytelling. It really felt like we're trying to tell this, like, love story, but it's not fun. There was nothing about it that felt joyful, and it didn't capture that sort of oddball perspective of not realizing that you're an oddball. Because so many shows, you have your main characters. You have your Ross and your Rachel. And so many shows never let Phoebe be the main character. And that's why I think when Friends ended and they spun off Joey into his own show, that show wasn't as successful. Because Joey was the oddball side character. You know, he's the how you doing? And Phoebe is kind of the oddball side character with Smelly Cat. People were there for the main character of Ross and Rachel and Monica and Chandler. And then the other characters add flavor. What the Munsters did was it created this show where the oddball characters were the focus. And they did it by sort of placing them in the middle of all these other people and just making them oblivious and delighted. They weren't like oppressed. There was nothing about it that felt like people were picking on them. If somebody reacted to them, they found a way to explain it away. It was just a different perspective, and it was joyful and it was fun. This movie was not joyful and fun. It was a dirge. It was plodding. It was just not great, and it didn't have that spirit of fun. So that is the video. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. That is why I think the Munsters, despite all the good intentions in the world, just sucked. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're a Munsters fan, let me know what you liked about it. If you really enjoyed it, let me know down below, because I would love to hear other perspectives of why people really enjoyed this, because I think some people did. I don't think it was universally hated, but I would love to know what you loved about it, what you really saw. I'm often willing to give things another chance and try to see something new in it, so let me know down in the comments below. Or if you agree with me, let me know the part that frustrated you the most. If you haven't seen it, let me know why, whatever. Just let me know down in the comments below. While you're down there, don't forget to give me that thumbs up. Say, you know what, Eddie and Marilyn, if you're going to have the Munsters, you got to have them. Give me that thumbs up. Let me know you liked it. Or if you're like, bitch, this was the best prequel I have ever seen. I love a good love story. That walking mannequin, Sherry Moon Zombie, was a revelation. Give me a thumbs down. It's all engagement. The algorithm isn't a picky bitch, and neither am I. And while you're down there, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads. I have been uploading at least 2 videos a week, including vintage episodes of my podcast, Miss Jaye the Renovation. Plus size drag queen tries to fast track some life improvements through cheesy self-help books. I've been really good about trying to get things edited and out. Let's cross fingers that we can keep up with it. During spooky season, I've had a lot of content, so you might even get a bonus video. Ooh, nostalgic. And if you'd like to chat, banter, or commiserate between uploads, all of my social media will be linked down in the description box below, including a link to my website, The World of Champagne, at janessajay.com. Thank you so much for watching. I love and appreciate all of you, even if we disagree. I'm so glad that we're friends, and I'm so glad that you stopped by. And until I see you again, bye. God, I love this look with this hair. I had to check something, and then I got distracted by my own beauty.